Imagine stepping into the shadowy halls of a forgotten fortress on the sun-baked African coast, where the crash of waves hides the echoes of chains and desperate cries. In the 15th century, Portugal didn't just stumble upon Africa, they engineered a ruthless system of coastal factories that birthed the horrors of the transatlantic slave trade. These weren't mere trading posts, they were the blueprints for centuries of human exploitation. But what if I told you that beneath the well-known tales of gold and glory lie raw, suppressed truths about secret papal decrees, mixed-blood middlemen and experimental islands that turned human lives into commodities? Stick around as we uncover Portugal's dark invention that reshaped the world and why it's still haunting us today. This is Ages Explained, diving into the depths of history's hidden layers. Let's start with what most history books tell you, the known foundations of Portugal's early factory system on the African coast. In the early 1400s, under Prince Henry the Navigator, Portuguese explorers set sail down Africa's western shores, driven by dreams of gold, spices, and a sea route to Asia. By 1445, they established their first permanent trading post, or feitoria, on the island of Arguim, off modern-day Mauritania. This was initially a hub for gold and ivory from the Sahara trade routes, but it quickly pivoted to include enslaved Africans captured in raids or bought from local rulers. Fast forward to 1482, and the Portuguese built Elmina Castle, São Jorge da Mina, in what is now Ghana. This massive fortress became the epicenter of their operations, controlling access to West African gold fields and serving as a depot for goods flowing back to Europe. These factories were fortified outposts, complete with warehouses, chapels, and garrisons, allowing Portugal to monopolize trade along the coast. By the late 15th century, they had expanded to places like the Cape Verde Islands and São Tomé in the Gulf of Guinea. The system was efficient. Portuguese merchants traded European goods like textiles, horses, and metal tools for African commodities, including people. This laid the groundwork for the transatlantic slave trade, with the first recorded shipload of 235 enslaved Africans arriving in Lagos, Portugal in 1444. Over time, these factories exported tens of thousands annually, fueling Portugal's economy and setting a model that other Europeans would copy. But that's the surface-level story, the one taught in classrooms. Now let's peel back the layers to the rare, raw facts that scholars crave, the details often buried in archives or overlooked in mainstream narratives. These aren't polished anecdotes. They're the gritty realities that reveal the human cost and cunning mechanics of the system. First, consider the papal backing that sanctified it all. In 1452, Pope Nicholas V issued the bull Dum Diversas, granting Portugal the right to invade, conquer, and enslave non-Christians in Africa. This was followed by Romanus Pontifex in 1455, which explicitly authorized the trade in enslaved people as part of Portugal's civilizing mission. These decrees weren't just religious fluff, they were legal green lights for brutality, turning raids into holy endeavors. Rarely discussed is how these factories evolved into outright prisons. Elmina Castle, for instance, wasn't just a trade hub. By the 1500s, it housed dungeons where captives were held in squalor, seasoned to survive the Middle Passage. Historical records show that Portuguese captains like Antão Gonçalves conducted razzias, swift slave hunts, in the 1440s along the Mauritanian coast, capturing Wolof and Berber people before factories were even built. Another under-the-radar element, the rise of Luso-African middlemen. These were mixed-race traders, often sons of Portuguese merchants and African women, who operated as lançados, independent agents flung into the interior. They spoke local languages, married into elite families, and facilitated deals that blurred the lines between African agency and European coercion. In regions like Senegambia and the rivers of Guinea, these intermediaries supplied up to 80% of the captives by the 1500s, creating a hybrid economy that Portugal exploited without deep inland conquests. Hang on. Before we dive deeper, imagine this. What if a tiny volcanic island off Africa's coast became the deadly prototype for the entire Atlantic slave economy? That's coming up in just a moment. A fact so experimental and brutal it could rewrite how we see the origins of plantation slavery. Don't click away. This is where history gets real. Moving into even rarer territory, let's talk about São Tomé and Príncipe. These uninhabited islands, discovered by the Portuguese in the 1470s, became their test lab for sugar slave plantations. By the 1490s, they imported thousands of enslaved Africans from the Congo Kingdom and Benin, forcing them to clear jungles and plant sugarcane. This wasn't random. It was a calculated experiment. Rare accounts from chroniclers like Valentim Fernandes describe how the island's harsh conditions, malaria, isolation, and relentless labor, killed off up to 70% of arrivals in the first years, perfecting the seasoning process that would later devastate Brazil. What's raw here is the complicity. Portuguese kings like Manuel I granted monopolies to favorites, turning human trafficking into a royal enterprise. In 1513, they established a factory at Mpinda in the Congo, where King Afonso I initially allied with Portugal, converting to Christianity and supplying captives from wars. But hidden in the records is the betrayal. By the 1520s, Portuguese demands escalated, leading to raids that depopulated villages and sparked revolts. Scholars point to letters from Afonso himself, pleading with Lisbon to stop the unchecked enslavement, revealing cracks in the alliance that history often ignores. Another obscure gem, the factory at Cachot in Guinea-Bissau, founded in the 1580s, where Portuguese Jesuits ran a model slave operation, blending evangelism with exploitation. They baptized captives en masse before shipment, claiming to save souls while chaining bodies, a hypocrisy exposed in Vatican archives. If you're still with me, here's another bombshell that'll keep you hooked. Did you know these early factories inadvertently sparked Africa's first anti-slave trade resistance movements? We'll unpack that next, with evidence from forgotten chronicles that challenge the narrative of passive victims. Delving further, rare facts emerge from the economic underbelly. Portugal's factories weren't just about slaves, they integrated into pre-existing African networks. In the Niger Delta, they traded with the Kingdom of Benin for pepper and cloth. But by the 1480s, slaves became the dominant export, with Benin rulers like Oba Ozolua supplying war captives in exchange for firearms, a cycle that fueled internal conflicts. A scholarly nugget. Archaeological digs at Elmina reveal layered dungeons with drainage for waste, designed for long-term holding up to 1,000 people at a time. Raw numbers from the Transatlantic Slave Trade database show that between 1501 and 1600, Portugal shipped over 300,000 Africans, mostly through these coastal hubs, with mortality rates on voyages hitting 20 to 30% due to overcrowding and disease. Less known is the gender skew. Early factories targeted men for labor, but by the 1520s, women and children from the Congo made up 40%, sold for domestic service in Lisbon. And here's a chilling rarity: the pombeiros, African agents trained by Portuguese to venture inland, raiding villages hundreds of miles from the coast. Chronicles from the 1500s describe them as black Portuguese, armed with European weapons, who blurred racial lines in the trade's machinery. As we wrap up the historical core, it's crucial to connect these dots to today. Where does Portugal stand now on its slave trade legacy? The known narrative is one of gradual acknowledgement. In recent years, memorials like the one in Lagos, where the first slave market stood, have been established, and schools teach the basics. But the rare, raw truth is the ongoing debate. In 2023, President Marcelo Rebelo de Sousa became the first leader to publicly suggest a national apology, stating Portugal should assume responsibility for crimes like massacres and enslavement, going beyond words to build a better future. He highlighted the transatlantic trade's injustices, where Portugal trafficked nearly 6 million Africans over 4 centuries. However, in 2024, the right-wing government rejected formal reparations, focusing instead on reconciliation through cultural exchanges and development aid to former colonies like Angola and Guinea-Bissau. Scholars criticize this as insufficient, pointing to suppressed histories in education and the lack of restitution funds. Raw fact: Portugal's National Museum of Ancient Art holds artifacts looted during the era, yet repatriation talks stall. Activists push for truth commissions, inspired by global movements, but political resistance from parties like Chega frames it as betraying history. Today, Portugal grapples with this past through initiatives like the Never Forget program, but the divide between acknowledgement and action remains a scholarly battleground. If this deep dive into Portugal's shadowy factories has ignited your curiosity about history's untold stories, hit that subscribe button on Ages Explained. Join our community for more raw, scholarly explorations that challenge what you thought you knew. Like, comment your thoughts below, and turn on notifications. We've got more gold mines coming your way. Thanks for watching.